Once upon a time, in a faraway land,
What are fairy stories?
The strange and wondrous place where nothing is as it seems.
Magic mirror on the wall. Who is the fairest?
Fairy is a perilous land.
Before she found herself falling down what seemed to be a very deep
It
well.
is the place you visit
A world
in your
of
dreams.
myth and magic.
when the clock began to
The
chime
evening
midnight,
star sailed down through the
A
sky.
mysterious voice began calling to the sad
She
princess.
pricked her finger with her needle. 3 drops of blood fell on the
In a
small
trance,
forest
she
window.
followed the haunting
And peered
sound
into the
of the
hollow
winding
tree.
stairway to the top of the
You
tower.
can read along with me in your book.
she waved her wand and said the magic words.
Let's begin now.
Well met, witches. Welcome to Storybook, Sacred Lore of Witchcraft. We've gathered this evening to hear a piece of sacred lore, The White Snake, collected by the Brothers Grimm. Every day at noon, a covered dish was placed on the king's table. Then after everyone left, the king would eat alone from this dish, and no one in the entire realm knew what kind of food was in it. One of the servants became curious and wanted to know what the dish contained. On one occasion, after the king had ordered him to take the dish away, he could no longer restrain himself. So he took the dish to his room and uncovered it. As he lifted the cover, he found a white snake laying inside. And once he laid eyes on it, he felt a great desire to taste some of it. So he cut off a piece and began eating it. No sooner did his tongue touch the flesh of the snake than he understood the language of animals and heard what the birds on the windowsill were saying to each other. On this very same day, the queen lost one of her most beautiful rings, and the suspicion fell on him, the servant. The king also said that if he was not able to find the thief by morning, he himself would be punished as if he had been the guilty person. The servant became sad and went down to the courtyard where some ducks were resting in the water. As he was watching them, he heard one of them say, "There's something heavy in my stomach. I ate a ring that the queen has lost." The servant took the duck and carried it to the cook. "Kill this one, it's fat enough." So the cook cut off the duck's neck, and when he began cleaning it, the queen's ring was lying in its stomach. The servant brought it to the king, who was astonished and happy. Since he was sorry that he had treated the servant unjustly, he said, "Demand whatever you would like, and whatever position of royal honor you would like." However, the servant declined every offer, even though he was young and handsome. His heart was sad, and he didn't want to remain at the court any longer. So he asked only for a horse and for money to travel and see the world. Well, he was provided with everything in the very best way. The next morning he rode off and came to a pond where 3 fish were trapped in the reeds and were wailing that they'd have to die if they couldn't get back in the water. So he dismounted, took them out of the reeds and put them back in the water. Then the fish cried out,
"We'll remember you, and one day we'll repay you."
He rode on, and a while later he heard an ant king crying out,
"Get away from us! Your enormous beast is trampling us with his large hooves!"
The young man looked down to the ground and saw his horse had stepped on an anthill. So he turned his horse away, and the ant king called out,
"We'll remember you, and one day we'll repay you."
Soon the servant entered a forest, where 2 ravens were throwing their young ones out of their nest. They said that their tiny ones were now big enough and could feed themselves, The young birds lay on the ground and screamed that they would die from starvation because their wings were still too small and they couldn't yet fly in search for food. So the young man dismounted, killed his horse with his sword, and threw the horse to the young ravens. They hopped over to the horse, ate their fill, and said, "We'll remember this, and one day we'll repay you." The young man moved on and came to a large city where he heard a proclamation that whoever wanted to marry the king's daughter would have to perform a task given by her, and if he didn't complete it successfully, he would forfeit his life. Many princes had already been there and had lost their lives, so there was nobody anymore who dared to try. This is why the princess had the proclamation issued again. The servant thought about it and decided to declare himself as a suitor. So he was led out to the sea, where a ring was thrown into it. He was to fetch it, and if he came out of the water without it, he'd be pushed back into the sea and would have to die in the water. As he was standing on the shore, the 3 fish that he had taken from the reeds and thrown into the water came swimming towards him. One of the fish held a shell in its mouth, and the ring was in the shell. The fish set it down on the beach at the feet of the young man, who was full of joy. So he brought the ring to the king and demanded the princess. However, when the princess heard that he wasn't a prince, she refused to accept him. Instead, she scattered 10 sacks full of millet seeds in the grass. He was to pick them all up before sunrise the next day. And every single grain was to be gathered, or else he'd lose his life. All at once, the ant king came with all his ants whom the young man had protected, and they picked up the millet seed during the night and poured them back into the sacks. By morning, they had finished the task. When the princess saw that the sacks had been filled, she was astonished, and the young man was brought before her. Since he was handsome, she liked him, but demanded that he perform a 3rd task. He was to fetch an apple from the tree of life. As he stood there and thought about how he might get it, one of the ravens, whom he had fed with his horse, came and brought the apple in its beak. This is how he became the princess's husband. And when her father died, he became the king of the entire country. The end. When we next gather, we'll explore the symbols and events of this story to see what hidden wisdom we can find within its tale. Until then, may all your travels be filled with wonder.